I'm the shit, I should have a breeze on me. Yeah, I'm the shit.
The Wolfenstein game series is one of the best game series ever made. While it has been rebooted more than once, there are still so many great Wolfenstein games to get into. This video is aimed at discussing what makes each Wolfenstein great or not so great, and allows me to reminisce on my childhood love for this series.
Number 6.
Wolfenstein. Officially a reboot of the series as a whole, the 2009 Wolfenstein aimed to end the 8-year drought of the series and publish a game with not only a modern single-player campaign, but also a multiplayer. In the single-player campaign, you take on the role of the infamous BJ Blazkowicz, who discovers an unnatural medallion during an operation. BJ learns that the Nazis have begun digging deep into crystal mines and harnessing this supernatural power. You fight against iconic villains, and like any Wolfenstein game, you are helping assist the German resistance in the fictional town of Eisenstadt. This game was at the peak of hype for many right reasons. It had continuously been delayed. Previews showed massive open levels with what appeared to be neat supernatural powers that BJ could harness himself. The weapons seemed reminiscent and altogether extremely fun to use and powerful. However, the game falls short. Very short. Wolfenstein had many callbacks to the original game, but BJ no longer had that badass persona that we got from the original series. While this doesn't necessarily make or break the game, as Return to Castle Wolfenstein made a seemingly normal Army Ranger OSA agent work, this BJ felt like he only progressed because he was lucky. At no point do you get the feeling that you are an unstoppable Nazi killing machine. The level design in the game was interesting and a staple of all the games in the series. There is a sense of exploration for hidden items that assist you in progressing through the game. Wolfenstein, however, makes an attempt at an open world in a lackluster way. You can only run around certain main hub areas while the black market dealers were, which is where you upgraded. You still had to travel out to specific missions, none of which took place very far from Eisenstadt. The game began to feel almost repetitive in terms of world design and certainly hindered the experience as you felt constrained to a small portion of the war. Lastly, the hype of having a supernatural presence in the game was fully revealed with the reveal trailers. The most supernatural forces you fought were afflicted Nazi officers who consumed too much of the crystal and became a seemingly repetitive mini-boss. The worst part of the game that doesn't even deserve to be talked about is its multiplayer. It was so broken and was never fixed, and it ruined the game entirely, putting this game at number 6.
Number 5.
Wolfenstein 3D. From this point on, all of the following Wolfenstein games are phenomenal projects and are staples of the FPS genre as a whole. Wolfenstein 3D, however, is considered the grandfather of it all. Wolfenstein 3D kicked off the series and introduced gameplay mechanics that would be present in all Wolfenstein games to follow. In Wolfenstein 3D, you take on the role of, again, BJ Blazkowicz, who is tasked with sabotaging the enemy regime of the Nazis and foiling their schemes. BJ is imprisoned underground in Castle Wolfenstein. BJ manages to acquire a Luger handgun and advances through the walls of the castle in search to uncover Operation Eisenfaust. Compared to the newer Wolfensteins, this one definitely feels old, but is an acquired taste. You must put the game in perspective and realize that it was revolutionary for its time, with difficult enemies, multitude of weapons, hidden areas, and treasure that helped upgrade your character when found, difficult boss fights that were diverse in their own way, and the ability to hold multiple weapons at once. Wolfenstein 3D laid the groundwork for the games to follow, and if it wasn't for the following game developers' abilities to improve upon the Wolfenstein mechanics, this game would be at number 1.
Number 4.
Spear of Destiny. Released in the same year of Wolfenstein 3D in 1992, this game builds upon 3D, but adds in an element that has stuck with some of the best Wolfenstein games. It added a sense of supernatural forces driving the Nazi regime and this dark cultist sect of the Nazi Empire that were in search of mythical weapons and power that could win them the war, while set before the events of Wolfenstein 3D, telling the story of how BJ was captured. His mission was to reclaim the Spear of Destiny from the Nazis, where the wielder of the spear becomes an unbeatable being. Many of the mechanics and design of this game are similar to Wolfenstein 3D. The only reason this is in front of Wolfenstein 3D is because of the added supernatural aspect.
Number 3.
Wolfenstein The New Order. This game was released in 2014 and was considered a soft reboot of the entire franchise. This installment attempted to do what the 2009 Wolfenstein set out to do, and that was to modernize the game series in terms of mechanics and visuals, with new and enticing gameplay and campaign. It did just that. With a powerhouse publisher like Bethesda behind it, this game was set up for success. In this game, you are, of course, BJ Blazkowicz, but this time, a much more beefy and bulky BJ that looks like unrealistically big, but in a good way. In this game, the alternate universe is built upon the premise that the Nazis won World War II and have taken control of the world. The game begins with you fighting to take Castle Wolfenstein during the war, but you are wounded and slip into a coma. You wake up 14 years later in an asylum that is run by Nazis. You fight your way through them and escape to help the resistance fight against the death-bringing Nazis, with an iconic villain resurrected. This game revived the most beloved aspect of the original series. Stealth and brute force are two completely viable approaches in progressing through the various levels. Level design was unique and diverse, with many secret areas to explore that grants bonuses to your character. Not only is level design impressive, this reboot takes you to many diverse places, like maybe a trip to the moon, unlike the last Wolfenstein reboot where you were stuck in Eisenstadt. There is a skill and progression system that transpires to other difficulty playthroughs so your BJ Blazkowicz can become as powerful as possible. Enemies and boss fights were challenging, and yet rewarding with new approaches to the fights. There are many weapons you can unlock and customize with the progression system that rewards any player's playstyle. It also introduced personal stories and meaningful allies that fought with you and the player cared about as they progressed through the story, which is difficult to achieve in first-person shooter campaigns. The only thing it was missing was the supernatural aspect that solidifies these Wolfenstein games. However, it revived the core fundamentals of what not only a good Wolfenstein game has, but what any single-player first-person shooter should include. It did not include any multiplayer, which had not been done since the originals like Wolfenstein 3D and Spear of Destiny, but its effort was no less as displayed in the single-player campaign.
Number 2.
Wolfenstein The Old Blood. A standalone game that was treated as a successor to The New Order, but chronologically takes place before the events of The New Order. This game was extremely similar to the relationship between Wolfenstein 3D and Spear of Destiny. The Old Blood places you in BJ Blazkowicz's boots again as he returns to Castle Wolfenstein, and he is met with the same gameplay mechanics, but new foes and brand new weapons, along with new supporting characters that strengthen the game's storytelling. What this game does better than The New Order is that it brings the supernatural side of the Wolfenstein universe back to the canon, similarly to how Spear of Destiny did it. It also managed to introduce another iconic villain and a new separate mode to play. Once each level was unlocked, you could go back and play the most epic fights in that level and up the difficulty. You could also compete with others around the world to get better scores.
Number 1.
Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Playing as BJ Blazkowicz again, you are an OSA operative that we all love. While taking on the persona closer to a badass, you are not quite the big tough guy that The New Order and Old Blood brings us. Return to Castle Wolfenstein also does not delve deeper into the story of who BJ Blazkowicz is and what he necessarily believes in, or why he's fighting. He almost seems sort of a robotic puppet of the OSA and is strengthened by a lack of dialogue. In spite of all that, this game is still the best one in the series. You start your campaign in Egypt, then to Germany, then to Norway to secret testing facilities, then back to Germany in Castle Wolfenstein. It blends nicely with the previous games mentioned in terms of open world and diversity in geographical locations you explore. It isn't necessarily open world, but instead very linear, which works in this case because it allows you to explore a diverse world affected by the Nazi regime, and this game makes you feel the vast influence of the Nazis and how they had that influence in this fictional timeline. Almost no two levels are the same either. The levels themselves are diverse and unique with secret areas to explore. The game constantly gives you weapons to find that are better and better than your previous ones, while also increasing the difficulty of some enemies, making the weapons not just feel overpowered, but also necessary to completing the game. The enemies are also diverse. While there are still everyday Nazis to kill in each level typically presents newer and more challenging enemies to face. Level designs also suggest certain playstyles, forcing the player to be either stealthy or gung-ho. Some levels force you to do one or the other, literally, but most of the levels offer some degree of player freedom in choosing which playstyle, and this is liberating. The final criteria making this game number one is that it includes the supernatural, more than any other Wolfenstein game, by a long shot. With mummies, Nazi-enhanced super mutants, ghosts, and medieval bosses resurrected by the Nazis, there are no shortages of surprises, and certainly this game established the supernatural side of the series with great success. Not only is this my favorite Wolfenstein game, in my opinion, it is my favorite game I've ever had the joy of experiencing, and would go back gladly playing it again anytime, no matter the graphics or the quality compared to today's standards.
Tell you how this is gonna work. I'm gonna ask you one question. You are gonna answer that question in a way I find satisfactory, and if you do not, I will saw your head off with this here appliance, you hear me?